watching a lesson on implementing IP version 4. In this lesson, I'm going to show you all the different ways to, well, implement IP version 4. In other words, there's a few different ways that you can go in and assign an IP address to a server, and we'll see that it's more than just an IP address, but I'm going to show you the different ways to do it. So here we are on Windows Server 2012. I will tell you I happen to be on New York DC1. Okay, that is the computer that I'm on right now, but it really doesn't matter if you are following along which computer you're on. Okay, we're not actually going to set anything. I'm going to show you where and how you would set it. I'll show you how to view it, and this would be exactly the same no matter what Windows Server 2012 computer you're on. Now, there's a few different ways that we can configure or get into configure our IP configuration. And the first way I want to show you is through the Server Manager. Right? So let's go ahead and open up the Server Manager, right? Because we've already learned that pretty much when managing servers, well, we want to do it through the Server Manager. Now, I will mention while we're waiting for the Server Manager to completely spin up here, and that is what we're looking at here is your typical server. Okay? And your typical server, you would do this through the Server Manager, whereas on a typical client, I want you to keep in mind that you probably would not need to do any of what I'm about to show you because your typical client is going to be getting its IP address dynamically. Okay? You don't want to be running around to all the computers in your network to set up their IP configuration. They're going to get it through something called DHCP. Now, I'm not going to go into DHCP here because there's a whole nother lesson on that. But basically, I want you to understand the idea that DHCP, just to make it real simple, it stands for the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, and it means just that. It means we're going to dynamically give out IP addresses. So we're not going to worry about clients, but here we are on the server, and we've seen this once before. If you were here for the lesson when we first installed Windows Server 2012, you may recall that we went up to the local server, and then from within the local server window, and it's taking just a moment to load up here, right here under Ethernet, it shows you your IP configuration. From there, because this is pretty generic, you can click on it. This is an actual link. You click on it, it takes you straight into your network connections. Here's my Ethernet connection. If I right-click and select Properties, I can then highlight Internet Protocol version 4. And by the way, I should mention, if you've ever done this in any prior version of Windows Server, this is not new. Okay, this screen has been around pretty much since, well, pretty much we'll say since the inception of Windows Server. So what we're going to do here is highlight by clicking on the words. Don't click on the checkbox, because if you click on the checkbox, you're going to actually clear it. Click on the words to highlight, and then select Properties. Here is where you can see that I've already statically assigned a specific IP address. Right? I said use the following IP address, and here it is, 192.168.10.201 with an appropriate subnet mask, default gateway. Down here is where I tell it to use a specific DNS server. And you'll notice it's pointing to this oddball looking IP address. It says 127.0.0.1, which of course is the loopback address. So anytime you see an IP address of 127.0.0.1, that means look to myself. Okay, that's what that IP address is. Okay, I just as easily could have put in here 192.168.10.201, and it would essentially have the same effect. Okay, so what we're saying here is because I'm on New York DC1, because I am a domain controller, because I am also a DNS server, and don't get too caught up if you on things right now if you don't know what DNS is. There's a whole lesson on that where I talk about DNS. But for now, as far as right here, just know that we are looking to ourselves, right? This domain controller is looking to itself for DNS. Now, beyond this information right here, there's a few other things you can do. First of all, if I click on Advanced, this is where I can go ahead and I can add, and this is something that's outside the scope of what we're going to talk about here, but you actually have the ability in certain scenarios to add additional IP addresses to a specific card on the computer. Okay, so here you'll see that we have the one, right, 192.168.10.201. I could click on add and add an additional one, or I could click edit if I want to make changes. Obviously, this would not be very typical that you would come in here. I mean, why would I click edit and then edit this here when I could have just modified it without going into the advanced settings? Down here, of course, you see your default gateways. You can also put a specific metric. Okay, so this has to do with if you want to give priority to one interface over the other. Okay, again, some of this is kind of outside the scope of where we're at, but I do want to point out what everything here is. But a more specific reason that you would come into your advanced settings would be to go to the DNS tab, because you may recall on the previous screen, and I'll show you when we click out of this, you had the ability to put in two DNS servers. You could put a preferred DNS server and an alternate DNS server. But if you want to point to more than two DNS servers, which is not that uncommon in an enterprise environment, you could add additional DNS servers here. You also have the ability to play around with your DNS suffixes. Now again, I'm not going to go into DNS here. There's a whole lesson on that. But basically this has to do with if you were to look for a computer just by its name, right, just more of its common name, what some people think of as the old NetBIOS name. So an example I could give you is if I want to refer to a computer as just NYDC1, right, because that's the computer I'm on right now, when the reality is its full name is nydc1.globalmantics.local. Well, you'll see here that you can have the DNS suffixes, right, the globalmantics.local, you can have that automatically appended when searching just for the simple name. Okay, so that's what's going on here. And then we have some information about registering in DNS. Okay, so registering with the DNS servers. Now, again, I understand that if you're not familiar with DNS, some of this might almost sound like a foreign language. But again, there is a DNS lesson where we will talk about all of that. I just want to show you that this is where you can do it in your IP settings. Now, another tab we have here is the Wins tab. And many people look at this and say, what the heck do they have that there for? Wins is dead. Or at least in many people's book, Wins is dead. Well, Wins may or may not be completely dead in your network. Wins has to do with the dynamic name resolution for NetBIOS names. Okay, and this was prevalent back in the 90s, whereas now it is pretty much true. We really don't use NetBIOS names anymore. But in case you have any of that older stuff out there, if you have something that is NetBIOS name specific and you need to have a Wins server, well, you can set up your Wins server settings here. All right, so let's go ahead and back out of this window. Here is where I said I would show you preferred DNS server, alternate DNS server. But again, you have to go into advanced if you want to add additional DNS servers. And realistically, that's the main reason that you would go into that advanced button. But there's one more thing I want to show you here. Even though it looks like that's pretty much everything with this screen, there is one more thing that I want to show you. And up here at the top, you'll notice there's just one tab, right? The General tab. But that's because I'm using a static IP address. If I was on a system where I was going to get my IP address automatically, okay, like the clients that I mentioned before, getting IP addresses through a DHCP server, if you click that button, you'll see here that another tab shows up for alternate configuration. And what the alternate configuration tab has to do with is what happens if I am looking to get my IP address automatically, but am unable to do so. In other words, if I'm out there looking for this thing that I mentioned earlier, a DHCP server, and I can't find it, well, now what do I do? So let's click on that tab, and you'll see here that you have a couple choices. You can either, and this is the default, use something called a PIPA, APIPA, which is Automatic Private IP Address. And this is where you dynamically give yourself a random IP address. It will begin with 169.254, and you will only be able to communicate with other computers that also have an APIPA address. Now the other option, and this is a pretty good option if you happen to have a server that is dynamically getting its IP address, is you can do a manual backup IP configuration for when the DHCP server isn't available. So I can manually go in here and put an IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, DNS servers, and Win servers. But these IP addresses will only be used if the system is not able to dynamically get its IP address from the DHCP server. All right, let's go ahead and cancel out of here. And I'm going to actually cancel all the way out of everything because I don't want to make any changes. Okay, we already configured this system appropriately back when we first installed it. I wanted to show you where it was that we do that. Now, if you ever just want to view your IP configuration, right? You just want to see it. Well, first of all, like I mentioned, in the server manager under local server, you can see very basic settings. Now from there, obviously, I could click this link and then I could actually go in and right-click on my Ethernet connection, go into TCP/IP and actually look at it. Well, that's kind of a long process. What I would prefer to do is if I hit the Start button here, bring up the Start screen, and I'm going to type in CMD, which brings me into a command prompt. In the command prompt, I can type in a command called ipconfig. And when I type that in, you will see that it shows me my IP address, subnet mask, and default gateway. Right? I have them all listed here. Now, if I want to see more than that, I could type in ipconfig/all. And you'll see that there's a lot of information. Matter of fact, there's so much that I have to scroll back up to see it. So let me scroll back up to the top. Okay, you can see this is where I typed ipconfig/all. And now you can see that my host name is NYDC1. Here's that DNS suffix I was talking about, globalmantics.local. I'm not going to go into all of this information here about the node type. This actually has to do with some of the, believe it or not, the Win stuff that we were talking about before, and routing and proxy. We're not going to worry about that. But if I jump down here, you'll see that I have a physical address, right? This is this 00155D0A F505. That's also sometimes referred to as a MAC address. Okay, so that's the actual physical or MAC address of the network card or the network adapter in this system. Here's where you can see if I'm getting my IP address via DHCP or not, and you'll see I'm not. Auto configuration enabled. Now that says yes, only because it pretty much always does, unless you specifically had DHCP enabled and then you didn't have auto configuration enabled as the backup. Okay, but because that's the default, even though we're not using it, it's going to say yes. Now here you'll see I even get an IPv6 address listed, and then here's my IPv4 information. If I scroll down a little bit, you'll see there's more IPv6 stuff. Here's my DNS servers from an IPv6 and IPv4 perspective. Okay, so you get a lot more information if you hit ipconfig/all. Now I'd like to show you a couple other real quick ways that you could get in to update your TCP/IP configuration. Okay, so besides the server manager coming through here, let me go ahead and close that. Something else we could do is if I go ahead and click on Start, I could go to my control panel. In the control panel, I could click on Network and Internet. From Network and Internet, I could click on Network Sharing Center, or really it's the Network and Sharing Center. And then you click over here on a link that says Change Adapter Settings. And look where it takes us. Ta-da! To our network connections. The exact same window that we got to through the server manager. I don't know. Which do you think was easier? Server manager and then just click on local computer and click on that one link for Ethernet? Or that whole long, start, control panel, networking, it seemed like a lot more steps to get here this way. So let's close out of this. There is one other way, and this is another very typical way to get to your IP configuration settings, and that would be from the taskbar. Now in this particular system, I can't do it right now because I have the icon that shows me my network status turned off. Okay, down here in the notification area, typically you would see maybe the time and date and some additional icons. I like to keep mine real clean. Okay, so I have all mine turned off. In order to turn them on, you right-click on the taskbar, select Properties. From there, here's that notification area and a customize button, so I'm going to click on that. And then right here, there's a link for turn system icons on or off. When I click on that, here's the network icon. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on. Click OK, OK, OK. And you'll notice I now have that one icon. Again, it maybe doesn't look like your typical system that has a few different icons and the time and date. I like to keep it clean. But here's that one icon for my network connection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on it and select Open Network and Sharing Center. And then from there, I click Change Adapter Settings, and I'm into my network connections. Now, if you count the literal clicks, that may or may not be more clicks than what you would do if you were in the Server Manager. So if the Server Manager is open already, great. Just do it through there. But if it's not, I'll tell you what, this gets you here a lot faster than waiting for the Server Manager to open. Okay, so that's just another way that we can get in to modify our TCP/IP configuration. Now, I want to go ahead and clean this up and get that icon out of here. So I'm going to go back into the properties and take that away. While I'm doing that, I do want to remind you that these are the different ways that we can get in and actually configure an IPv4 configuration. But what it really comes down to, because this is not new. I mean, if you've configured an IP address back in, I don't even know how far back to take you, but pretty much in any Windows operating system, you probably could have figured out how to do it on Windows Server 2012. What I want to make sure that you do fully understand when it comes to the IPv4 configuration is understand how to assign the correct IP addresses. Make sure you understand what subnet you're on. Make sure you're pointing to the appropriate DNS servers. Okay, and again, I know that name keeps coming up, and I keep kind of brushing it off as I have a whole lesson on it, and I do, but it's very important. Okay, DNS is crucial, especially in an Active Directory environment. So you have to make sure you have your DNS servers, but you also have to make sure that you're pointing appropriately to those DNS servers. And if you have any doubts whatsoever on how to configure IP subnets or figure out which one you're on or assign the right IP addresses or DNS settings or PIPA or any of this stuff, please, again, remember to go watch my TCP/IP and Networking Fundamentals course where I go over all of that in great detail. And so that brings us to the end of this lesson where we saw, just like with many other things in Microsoft operating systems, there are many different ways of assigning IP version 4 IP addresses and configuration information. So that's pretty much it. I know it was kind of short and to the point, but hey, got to give you a break on one of these lessons. I'll see you in the next one.